Hi class. I hope you enjoy the Nun's Priest tale this week. It's a really interesting tale. It's a beast fable. And of course it plays Chanticleer the Rooster, and then it also plays Reynard the Fox. Reynard the Fox is probably one of the most popular figures in beast fables in the Middle Ages. In fact, they have what they call like the Reynard Epic, which is a series of beast fables about the fox, and that's in Old French. Which probably influences the story that we see here. But also then you have older influences like Aesop and Aesop's fables. Aesop in kind of classical legend, I guess, is known for being a slave. And he is freed eventually, but he's supposed to be this slave that goes around and learns lessons from animals and then eventually starts writing them down. And that's just legend. We don't know as well who he was. Probably lived in the 2nd or 3rd century BC is about the most that we know. But if you read up on some of that information that I've included for this week, that would be really good. But coming back to the Nun's Priest, we don't know much about the Nun's Priest. You'll recall when the prioress is mentioned, it says that accompanying her was a nun and a priest, and that is the Nun's Priest. There's a line in the general prologue, and that's all it tells us. So he's not a priest that's in a position of particular power because he's with a convent, and yet he is within that small world of women, probably the leader with equal status to the prioress. If not slightly more, at least in when questions of spiritual significance would come up, though questions of day-to-day living would probably fall to her within that small community. So he's going to be a figure that has some power within that small community, but he doesn't probably have as much influence as if he were in an all-male community. Again, and it would sometimes depend on a case-by-case basis, but that tells us a little bit potentially about him, just what we know about the religious communities of the time. But other than that, we don't know much. That he would be learned, yes, we know that. That he would be interested in teaching a lesson and not telling like a dirty story, yes, we know that. But that's about all we know. And knowing maybe that little about him, of all the tales that we read, it is one that is the least inhabited by the telltellers' sins and virtues, if you will. This tale among all of them just kind of stands outside. It's just a tale, like I said, because we don't know much about the tellteller. There's not really a figure that he or anyone else would necessarily identify with in this story because of, again, him only being one line in the general prologue. We can't make any definitive statements about that. So one of the things, though, I want to bring back to your attention, if you'll go to the end of the general prologue, you'll recall that the host, Harry the host, talks about how any of the telltellers will win the supper at the end of the pilgrimage. And they are supposed to tell a story of sentence, which is wisdom, and solace, which is pleasure, and like solace, that would be a more recognizable word today. And so this story of all of them among critics is kind of regarded as a story that embodies both of those virtues more than any of the other tales. Not that they don't, and I think you can see some attempt, especially by the knight, at the sentence and the solace, though certainly some of the other pilgrims do not accept his version, his kind of aristocratic version of things, as having both of those, both wisdom and pleasure. They might see a lot of wisdom in it. They probably see a lot of rhetoric in it. Pleasure, maybe to an aristocratic audience, to a regular medieval audience, it's harder to determine. Certainly figures probably like the miller or the reeve, more middle-class figures, may not find the knight's tale as interesting. The miller and the reeve's tale are such that they seem more focused on solace than wisdom. The sort of wisdom they're teaching is not the usual sort of wisdom, more kind of a, watch your back sort of wisdom. And they both are more interested in kind of one-upping the character before them, in this case the miller one-upping the knight or the reeve one-upping the miller, than they are in actually winning the supper. So those three tales generally fall a little more by the way. The wife and the partner both seem more interested in kind of telling their own stories and talking about themselves. Their tales are regarded more as kind of confessional in a way, talking about their own lives, autobiographical, than the other three tales, yes. But there's just a lot of baggage with all these stories. The Prioress has a little less baggage, but her tale is more sentence, more wisdom, a wisdom tale, being so focused on living correctly a Christian life than it is pleasure necessarily. I'm sure coming out of the church, to her such a tale should involve pleasure, but it wouldn't necessarily to the regular audience that is not within a religious community. So then we come to the Nun's Priest Tale. And it's a beast fable, so it's not religious in nature, yet it teaches some really good lessons. And you have a couple of different things going on here. Of course, we've got Chanticleer, the rooster, and then we have Bertelotte, his wife. Or at least she acts kind of like his wife. I mean, the thing is, roosters act like roosters, and hens act sort of like hens, and the fox acts sort of like a fox, with the exception of they happen to speak like they're human. And so he has multiple hens that are kind of part of his harem, and I don't think that word specifically is used, but certainly they refer to it as the whole group of them belong to him. But he has a dream. In fact, he has a dream about the fox. And then you kind of get this whole discussion about the value of dreams and whether or not one should listen to whether or not dream predictions are actually valid or not. And Bertelotte and he both discuss this, and they discuss it in fairly educated rhetorical tones. And then they go out and they're eating and they're behaving like chickens, and along comes a fox. And then, you see the dream kind of coming to fruition here. And then, then you have the rooster in the end fooling the fox, just as the fox fools the rooster by trying to get him to sing. We have the opposite here with the rooster in the very end kind of getting the better of the fox. And so that is interesting in and of itself. And let's see, I'm just going to try. Let me see if I come back to this tale. I'm trying to remember because I looked it over. Because I know that the kind of the message that the Nun's Priest gives and the message that the story itself gives are not always exactly the same. Okay, here we go. Lo, this is what it is like to be careless and negligent and to trust in flattery. But you think that this tale is a trifle about a fox or a cock and a hen, except the moral good people. For St. Paul says that all that is written is certainly written for our learning. Take the fruit and let the chaff alone. So what we have here is we actually have two messages. We have the message of the story, which is about flattery, trusting in flattery, in both cases with the fox and the cock. And, not to trust in flattery. And that's kind of, if you read, most fables end with kind of like, and the moral of the story is lines, and that is the moral of the story for the beast fable about flattery. And that's a fairly apparent sort of moral based on the events of the story. But what you may not see as much is the story that the lesson the Nun's Priest gives, because there are two lessons here. And the Nun's Priest lesson is actually about storytelling. And it is a line that a lot of people like to talk about with Chaucer, and it is to take the wheat and let the chaff be still. And that means, take what is valuable about the story and just leave the rest alone. Take what you need out of it and leave the rest alone. And he's kind of talking for all the tales and all the tale-tellers when he says this. And of course he also says it's from St. Paul, so he's just kind of confirming his own religious backgrounds, and also confirming that since it's from the Bible at the time, and in the religious circumstances of the time, people would accept it as kind of authoritative and a good lesson. And because there was some debate at the time about whether stories of learning and stories that taught moral lessons should be only about human beings and should only be like spiritual type stories, like the prioresses or something of that nature. And there was some debate about whether older kind of classical stories like beast fables were valid to teach people lessons about being moral. And obviously the Nun's Priest falls on the beast fables are okay side of things. If you look at the bestiary, you will also see that there is some definite tradition of using animals to teach us lessons, because they talk about animals in that way. They talk about the allegorical significance of the animal, what the animal means to the human in those stories, and that's what you have occurring in beast fables. And some people, modern day animal rights activists and stuff, may not like that reading of them as much, but certainly that was one of the ways that humans in the Middle Ages read animals. They read them kind of as an example of how to be better humans. And they would put human speech in their mouths and all those sort of things. But often that was based on patterns of behavior, natural behavior they saw in those animals, especially as they lived with them day to day, which is something, unless you kind of have lived or live a rural lifestyle in today's world, is not as common. So, of all of these things that we've learned from Chaucer's Canterbury Tales, I think this last line is from The Nun's Priest, from a story that doesn't have baggage, from a story that is a little bit funny and a little bit fun, and certainly has a moral at the end. So sentence and so loss. We can also learn to take the wheat and let the chaff be still. So when you have stories like The Miller's Tale that's dirty and yucky and they do all kinds of stuff, but it does have its humorous side as well. You can take the good out of that story. You can take some of the things the Miller's saying when he says to the knight, hey, that idealistic love where they just kind of fall in love immediately and fight over a girl, that doesn't make much sense. Here's how I think real love is. And of course, real love isn't quite like that either, but that's a lesson too, that maybe idealized love isn't perfect. And we learn lessons from the wife's tale that, women need to get some recognition, and we learn lessons from the partner's tale about what it means to be outcast, and to go seeking after death sometimes, and various other sins. We learn things from the Prioress's tale. We learn about the beauty of religious devotion, if that is something you believe, but we also learn about how hideous prejudice can be. And so in the end, like I said, it's take the wheat and let the chaff be still. And this is an important, very important idea of the Canterbury Tales. It's just this encapsulation of medieval society. Every single story we've read has been a little bit different, a little different approach. I hope you've liked them. I hope you feel like you understand the Middle Ages a little bit better from having read this story. The next story we're reading is Troilus and Cressida, and it will be very different than this story. It's kind of going to be a return to the Knight's Tale sort of tone-wise and stuff, but we're going to see a little more interesting things going on with the narrator and that sort of thing. So, your midterm is this week. I look forward to seeing some of your responses. I hope you all do well. I wish you the best of luck on that. And we'll see you next week with Troilus and Cressida.